Hi, everybody. My name is David Brown, and I'm a lawyer with Ascent Employment Law. Today, we're doing our very first panel discussion on a topic that's really interesting and has really kind of come alive over the course of the last few weeks. And of course, now with most of the population being fully vaccinated, it raises the question, can an employer require that their employees be properly vaccinated before returning to the workplace? It's highly controversial, and I'm so thrilled that with me here today, I've got two of my colleagues, Victoria Merritt first. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, David.
And my partner, Richard Johnson. Hi, Richard.
Hi, friends.
So the question to begin is, can an employer legally require somebody to get vaccinated before returning to the workplace? Victoria, I want to start with you. Have you turned your mind to this question at all?
I have, and I'm tempted to give the classic lawyer answer, which is it depends, but it's certainly a difficult question for employers. And one of the big considerations as an employment lawyer is, I think, human rights. And certainly that's the one that's going to attract the most attention. And you can think of it, much as with masking, there are certain reasons why people perhaps legitimately cannot get vaccinated. So I think an important distinction to draw is people who are making a personal choice not to be vaccinated versus employees who are making a choice not to be vaccinated or who can't be vaccinated for something that's protected under the Human Rights Code. And a straightforward example of that I think will be fairly common is somebody with a medical condition that means that they're not able to safely be vaccinated. Now, in those circumstances, requiring that person to be vaccinated before they return to work is likely going to be a human rights issue for you as an employer. And you're going to have your duty to accommodate that particular employee. So that is definitely a significant consideration. In the case of employees who are choosing not to get vaccinated and the choice is not protected under the Human Rights Code, I think in that case, your chances of being faced with a human rights complaint are diminished. And what's very interesting to me in these circumstances is the Human Rights Commission in BC actually came out with a statement on this point, confirming that in their view, a person who chooses not to get vaccinated as a matter of personal preference, again, distinguishing that from something protected under the code, will not have grounds for a human rights complaint. Now, importantly, that's the commissioner, so that's not the Human Rights Tribunal actually making that decision. But I think that should provide some assurance to employers that unless your employee is demonstrating the reason for not being vaccinated is protected under the Human Rights Code, you are able to require employees to be vaccinated without necessarily violating the Human Rights Code.
Right. Now, of course, we are coming to you from British Columbia, and when we're talking about the Human Rights Code, that's the British Columbia Human Rights Code. Every province has their own piece of legislation that's very similar, although there are some distinctions between provinces. And I'm thinking specifically of Ontario that refers to protected grounds of creed. And creed can be strongly held beliefs, right? And I hope I'm saying that right. So, somebody who in the past is a vegan, has held that this is part of their creed, and that would be upheld. It'd be really interesting to see if in other jurisdictions that same point might hold true. Richard, I want to look over to you next. When we're talking about vaccination status, health records, this is really personal, private information. Have you thought about the privacy concerns associated with requiring vaccination status from employees?
I have, yeah, and that's a great consideration. So in the province of BC in specific, we've got a few different government bodies that address various aspects of employment law or workplace law, and one of them is the OIPC, or the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of British Columbia. It's a mouthful, but essentially we've got a government body that's responsible to enforce the privacy legislation here in the province. And depending on whether you're an employee working for a private body or working for a public body, you'll have a piece of legislation that will apply to you. Most employees are in the private sphere, so they're governed by a piece of legislation called PIPA, the Personal Information and Protection Act. And under PIPA, employers need to be very careful about the information that they obtain about employees, that they use about employees, and that they disclose about employees. And employees have the right under this legislation to make sure they only have to give up enough information to their employer to keep that employment relationship maintained, to kick it off, to maintain it, and to end it. And one of the concerns that comes up with any sort of medicalized discussion or discussion about, being off on sick leave, having a medical condition, whether you're vaccinated or not, or where you are in the vaccination spectrum, that all attracts concern under the privacy legislation. And unless you've got a really strong connection between the requirements of the job and the information you're asking for, the employee has the right to make a complaint under the privacy legislation, or to refuse the employer's request for that information. And vaccination status is one of those areas where, unless you can clearly tie it to the job duties, that's the legislative right the employee has to say, no, I'm not going to give you that information.
So that's really interesting. So it's really not a black and white situation. It seems like in this process, there's going to be a certain amount of case-by-case analysis and looking at the individual job requirements and whether or not this is necessary from a disclosure perspective. I know that recently the province mandated that care homes require that their staff be vaccinated. And obviously, you're dealing with a vulnerable population. They're highly at risk of COVID-19. But it seems like, somebody who might be working in landscaping or working in an office environment or working in construction, they might not have those same concerns. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's a very circumstance dependent assessment. Though employers are asking us very frequently, can we go ahead and mandate vaccines or vaccinations for our employees? And the answer is not a blanket yes or no. We really got to delve in deeper.
One final area that I've been thinking about is the contractual consequences of having somebody requiring vaccination status or requiring vaccinations before returning to work. And specifically, I know we've talked about this in the past, but employment law is generally founded in contract. And like all contracts, you can't just modify these terms of this agreement without the consent of the other party, right? So in employment law, when an employer tries to fundamentally alter the terms of employment, this could be viewed as a constructive dismissal, and the employee may be entitled to treat the employment as being at an end. So one thing that I've been really trying to battle over this is, of course, employers can set up the rules of engagement. They can establish the policies that govern their workplace to an extent, as long as it's not a fundamental change, right? Coming back to this question of vaccination status, obviously before COVID, this wouldn't have been a term of employment for people entering into the workplace. And up until now, this would have never come up. So for me, I've been really questioning whether or not imposing on somebody to either get a vaccination or to disclose their vaccination status, whether this is a fundamental game changer, whether this fundamentally alters the terms of the employment contract and maybe allows the employee to say, I didn't sign up for this. I'm declaring that this relationship is over. Oh, and by the way, I'm seeking compensation from you as a result. Do you guys have any thoughts on that issue?
I do, and one of the things that I go back to repeatedly is the practicalities, and at Ascent, we really look at the practical aspects of things. And so consent can be an absolute answer to a lot of things, and that is where the employee might say, I'm vaccinated and I'm excited about it, and give you that information and say, you know what, I can appreciate what position the employer's in, and I'm going to do what I can to try to beat this thing as a business, and I'm going to do my part. And so I think the consent aspect and the voluntary disclosure that we see employees giving their employers is really key here. That open, transparent conversation is absolutely a game changer in my view.
To add to that, I think giving employees notice, if you are considering making vaccinations mandatory, will also mitigate against that concern a bit. And that gives them a chance, really a heads up that this change is coming. And really, if you're in a safety sensitive environment or somewhere where the only way to ensure the health and safety of your workplace is through vaccinations and not through other measures, this issue becomes a little bit simpler. And this returns to Richard's point that it's highly context dependent. So it's really going to depend on the facts of each case. And I think that holds equally true for your point about constructive dismissal and the contractual aspect.
Yeah, very well put. Yeah. Well, certainly this is a fascinating, complicated topic that is at the intersection of many different areas of law. No doubt, as we saw when COVID, first bound onto the scene, and we were facing all kinds of new challenges associated with these issues, it's going to be a slow evolution, and it's going to take some time for this to kind of work its way out. But I fully expect we're going to be revisiting this question over the course of the next weeks once things become a little bit more clear. Thank you both. This has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to chatting again very soon. We are Ascent Employment Law. You can find us at www.ascentemploymentlaw.ca. Talk soon.
Thank you.